All right, welcome back to the Open Bible, Open Life podcast. I'm excited to introduce you to a guest I've got with me today, Mary Flo, all the way from Dallas, Texas.
Yeah.
Welcome to Winston-Salem.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me.
Glad to have you. So we just finished our first ever, hopefully not our last. We need to get you back, get Megan back.
I love it.
We had our Birds and Bees conference for about 2 hours this morning. You gave an incredible talk, and then we did a Q&A for 30 minutes, and just it could have gone on and on and on. In fact, part of the reason we're doing this podcast is for people who were there and want more, as well as people who, we were talking about this. It was on a Saturday morning, not easy for a lot of families to get there.
Exactly.
So I want to talk to you today about what you talked about. We'll probably repeat some things, but we'll go into some new areas. So first of all, we were talking, and you said to me, maybe we can dive into this more, that there's a lot of resources. When we talk birds and bees, when we get to teenage years, and there's a lot of resources for people who are struggling and asking questions as adults. Not a lot of information to how to talk about sex with, preschool, elementary school kids. So can you just tell us the story of how did you get into this niche, which is so important? But how did you find yourself being the person who talks about this?
Exactly. It was as big a surprise to me as anyone else. But this started with two things that were going on in my life. Number one, I had young children, a 4-year-old and a 1-year-old, and the 4-year-old asked me, "Mommy, how is that baby getting out of there?" And because of the way I was raised with no information from my parents, although they were wonderful parents, I thought, I know how this happens. Can I tell you? And if I do, what does that sound like? I'd never heard what it sounded like. So that was happening at home. In the meantime, I was working with a volunteer organization in Dallas, the Dallas Junior League, and I like to teach, and so I was one of their trainers. And in the training, the beginning of the year, the trainers sit around a table kind of like this, and we talk about what our training will be like for the year. And the chairman had a little box, and it's a suggestion box from the members. Oh, this is what they want training on. And so she pulled out this wadded up piece of paper, and she said, no one will take this topic. And so it's been in the box for 5 years, but somebody's going to do it this year. And she unwadded it, and it was, will someone teach us how to talk to our kids about sex? And I immediately thought, well, that will not be me, because I don't even know how to talk to my own children, and my parents didn't talk to me. So I just checked it off that I wouldn't be the volunteer. It went around the room. No one took it. And she, oddly enough, just took that paper and pointed it at me and said, "Mary Flo, I think you should take this." And I said, "You are so wrong. It's not. No." And she said, "But we will send you to Washington, D.C., and you'll get some training there." I had a 4-year-old and a 1-year-old. And so all I heard her say was room service. It was like
Time away, your own hotel room.
Travel, and I get to go to a hotel. I don't care what the topic is, I'm taking it. So I went, and the training that I received, I couldn't pass that along. It was basically a seminar on safe sex, and
which is an oxymoron.
Sexually transmitted diseases and how to avoid them, and it was nothing that I would do. But these were all people going to learn how to talk to their kids about sex. And I thought, well, that's not what I'm going to do. So I came back and I said, "Thanks for the room service. I owe you a workshop, but I've already thrown away everything they gave me." I mean, I kept some things. But anyway, if you'll give me 6 months, I'm going to think about how I would do this differently. And so in those 6 months, I prayed. I talked to pastors, youth pastors, elementary school teachers, school counselors, parents of older children. I was really fun at a party because I would be like, "Hi, did your parents talk to you about sex? And if so, what did they say? And was it helpful?" I was just really, trying to.
I'm doing research.
I'm doing research for something, and the Lord just led me to the idea that the talk was ineffective. So how can we do it differently? We need to be answering them when they're asking those early questions and putting as much of our values as well as the basic biology. So that's a long answer, but that's how it got started.
Well, I'm glad you're addressing this because I've told our church this before, but my favorite commentary, I'm going somewhere with this, my favorite commentary to read is by Warren Wiersbe. You ever heard of him? Warren Wiersbe, he was in his 90s. He passed away in the last couple of years. He wrote a commentary on every book of the Bible except Song of Solomon. Very interesting. which was very much that generation,
Yes.
which is we will talk about everything in the Bible except sex. Now, sometimes we can go to the other extreme and talk only about that in certain circles, but I think it's so important what you're doing. In fact, I'd like you to give, I know you gave this at the conference, but many people listening will not have been there, and it's such a helpful framework for talking about sex with our kids or talking about sex with ourselves. Give us the categories of beauty, of boundaries, brokenness, but God. I thought those were really helpful. I love alliteration. I thought those were helpful categories. Can you just give us your framework? Because it's so helpful.
Well, sometimes we shy away as parents to tell our children about the beauty of sex because we're afraid they will run there. But then they're raised with with an attitude or a tone of voice that makes it seem shameful because parents don't want their children to be sexually active at a young age. They want them to wait until marriage, typically. So we start with a voice and an attitude that this is something fearful or shameful. But actually, when they're young, talking about the beauty, because they're not hormonally charged, they're not going to run out and do this.
That's right.
So to talk about the beauty of God's design in all living things, the beauty of God's design of a male-female relationship. So to emphasize that God was doing something beautiful for those that bear His image, and that how can I put this? Well, that we want to see what was God's purpose. If you want to know, a lot of us look at the world and say, we've gone wonky crazy about sex. Well, you go back to the original design. What was it originally designed to be? And its purposes are for oneness and fruitfulness. And so those were the two things that God wanted to happen with this, so that they can be one flesh, oneness, and also be fruitful and multiply. And so those two aspects are the parts that we want children to understand. When they're young, we usually focus on the fruitfulness. This is how babies are made. This is how babies are born. And then it's so crazy because our children think, oh, so you've done this 3 times?
Yes.
Yeah. Actually, we have done it 3 times, but there's another aspect to this that's a mystery, but it's a one flesh experience for that husband and wife, and it's an enjoyable one flesh experience, and so it happens a lot more often, but babies don't always come from it. That's a little, that's probably not the 3-year-old conversation,
Yeah, I get it.
but those purposes. So to remember the order that I think it's important to get is that the central core, since we're on a podcast, think of concentric circles. And the inner circle is beauty, the beauty of God's design. But in order to protect that beauty, He has set boundaries. He's set boundaries on all of His creation. There's boundaries for the water. There's boundaries of day and night. There's everything that He created in those days of creation. A boundary was set, and here and no further. And it wasn't to be restrictive. It was to nurture the beauty of it. And not to give it overexposure and not to be what it wasn't intended to be. So the beauty of sex, and then the next concentric circle is the boundaries that God has set up for the purpose of nurturing the beauty. And then we don't live in the garden anymore. And we are now in the world where we face a lot of brokenness. So in breaking out of those boundaries, we see brokenness, and we all bear the stain of that. And so either in our thoughts or our words or our deeds or our attitudes about sex, we have broken out of that beauty and have had experiences and regrets and misunderstandings and everything. But God wants us to get back there. So the final circle is, but God in His grace allows us to think anew about what He intended this to be, to maybe repent of some things, but also just to leave it with Him and move forward with your children in a way that the attitudes you want them to have.
Yeah, I love it. I want to get into, we'll see where we go with this, but I want to get into some questions, maybe repeating some questions that were asked so we maybe could dive deeper. Also, maybe there was a couple questions that were written down that I didn't get to because we opened it up for everybody else. One of the questions was, and this is a sensitive topic on top of a sensitive topic, but how do we think about the school system today? So you got on one extreme, there's homeschool parents who wonder, am I sheltering my kid too much? Are we maybe bomb sheltering? I loved your categories of ignorance is not the same as innocence. You know, I've used the categories for we want our kids to be innocent but not naive. Similar idea. But then at the same time, because in our church we have public school, private school, charter school, homeschool, who knows, university model, there's all these different things. So on one end, it's like, I don't want to overprotect. On the other end, there's people wondering, you know, I send my kid to school. We had a situation, I won't name the person, protect the innocent. But we had a person who sent their kid to school, thought, well, no, I'm way in the suburbs, everything's great. And they had to take their third grade out of school and just go, I didn't even know that this was being taught here. How do we think about, you know, I don't know what else to call it, sometimes the sexual agenda? And I don't know if this is changing now with the new administration and some things that are happening, but I think the parents are wondering, what are our kids being taught in school, not just from their friends, but from their teachers? How do we think about the school system, our role in it as Christians, and this hot topic of sexuality?
I think what I'm most fearful about, and I don't live in a very fearful way, and I have 9 grandchildren, and they all go. No, actually, some go to a parochial school, church school, but the others go to public schools, and so they're dealing with this. But I think what I'm most fearful about are some of the subtle ways that an agenda is being put forward in the early years. And then there are also ways that an agenda might be being put forward in the middle school when they actually do teach reproduction and all of that. I think the number one thing is for parents to get there first. Like, if you can get information to your children first, basically it doesn't make as much of a difference for your children. I talked about a sponge that's in the mind of your child, and if you can fill that sponge, not in an abrupt way, but in a very ordinary way of just drip, drip, drip conversations, then your child is not as vulnerable to those subtle messages that may be there. You can also, I think, be an involved parent. I know when our kids were going into middle school, there was a group of parents the year before us, and I so admired them for this. They went up to this middle school, and it was a public school, and said, okay, 6 months from now, you are teaching sex to our kids. We want to see the program. We want to experience the program. And we have questions. And I admire them for doing that, and I admire the administration for being open to that. And so they basically read everything that their children were going to read. They wanted to know, are you going to do this with boys and girls in the same room? Who's answering the Q&A? How do you get those questions? You know, they just wanted to experience the whole thing. Instead of saying, well, they know what they're doing, there was an assumption they might know what they're doing, but they may not. They may be a coach who got the assignment. And so, nothing against coaches, but so they explored that. And in the process, both the administration and the parents came away with, you know, a better understanding of how this was going to happen, and they made some modifications. Some parents opted out of it, but they told the school, we don't want our kids to be shamed for that if they're going to opt out. Like, don't send them to the principal's office because they're being let. So it was a long and lengthy conversation, but they didn't bring it up 2 weeks before the program. They said 6 months before the program. And after that, every year, like, the parents have been involved in that event. So I think parent involvement is really important, and then parents getting there first.
I love it. Well, my kids are now 13, 11, almost 9. I was telling you a little about them. But I can't remember which one it was. One of our kids, they were all very young. And we're at the dinner table, and one of the kids says, I know a bad word that you don't. And I just said, there is no bad word.
Surprise, surprise. I know it.
You know that I don't know. And there was a moment like, really? You know all the bad words? And anyway, and it's at that moment of like, you're exactly right. Hey, I'm dad, or I'm mom in this situation, and you can come to me, and there's nothing you're going to share with me that's going to scare me or shock me. And in fact, I'm going to tell you some things that you don't know, and then you're going to want to. I love that. You're going to want to come back to me, and your sponge, to use your illustration, is going to be full. All right, a couple other questions that we didn't get to, and we may revisit some other ones, but there was a couple questions that came from when people were filling out the forms beforehand of questions about how to uniquely talk about puberty. So I don't think we got into that. You mentioned it briefly, like, hey, have you ever heard of the word period before, and all these things. But as and obviously puberty comes at different ages, for
Right.
different children and all that kind of stuff. How do you begin to talk to your kids about puberty?
Well, I think you take them back before you take them forward.
Okay.
Like I would get out their photo album or scroll through your phone or whatever, pull some pictures together and say, this is when you were a newborn. And you changed from being a newborn to being a baby and a toddler. And your body and your mind and your emotional well-being have changed many times
Wow, so helpful.
in your life. But you were unaware of it. There is a change that will happen, and as it's happening, you'll be more aware of it because you're older now.
Yes.
And so let's say you're talking to your 8-year-old. Walk them through how you got to be 8 and all the things you can do now that you couldn't do before and how much stronger you are, how you've changed emotionally. Like when you were 6, you were really scared to go on the roller coaster, but look, you are loving it now. This is things that seemed scary, like jumping off the high dive. Now you do it and you don't. You look forward to it. There are things that you'll learn about in puberty that may seem scary, like starting your period. You'll get used to that. And some things you'll learn about and you'll think, I'll never do that. And later on you do that. So it's so I would take them back and make them aware, oh, I have experienced bodily changes before and my body knows how to do this. And then I would just say, also not shy away if a child finds a tampon in the purse. Instead of, oh, put that away. That's, you don't need to see that. Say, I'll bet you're curious about what that is. Let me explain that once a girl becomes a woman, every month her body produces a lining around her uterus that has to leave because there's not a baby there for that lining to nurture. So when it leaves, this protects her clothes while the substance is coming out.
What a helpful way to talk about it, yeah.
So it's good to think about it before and wonder how, instead of saying, I hope they don't ask, say, no, I want them to ask. I want them to know this.
Give the hack that you use when asked a question that that you need some time. We gave you a hard time about this at the conference, but it's so helpful.
Well, my husband and I were so afraid of these questions. That's another thing I want your congregation and anyone that hears this to know. This has been a long process for me. Like I did not want to talk. I wanted to be the person that hid under the bed and just let's don't talk about this. So I knew that we needed a pre-designated opening line and a pre-designated facial expression when our children were asking us questions. So we decided that would be great question, so glad you asked. That's the opening line. But to say it with a smile, that is a great question. I'm so glad you asked me that. And we talked about how that is not only a good response, an effective response to the children, because then they're glad they came to you, but it is also a stalling device because in the back of your head while you're saying something mindless like, great question, I'm glad you asked, you are able to process the things that you would like to say next instead of just opening it with the answer.
That's good. Another question we didn't get to. What is, and this came up as well, the role of mom, the role of dad. We may be the last people, Christians may be the last people on earth to go their different roles and responsibilities. What is the role uniquely of mom, and what is uniquely the role of dad in all of these conversations? I don't know how specific you want to get. What does dad uniquely do for daughter or for son? What does mom uniquely do for daughter, for son?
I love that because I think we've designated dad, you talk to the boys, mom, you talk to the girls. Our philosophy is when they're really young, you get the question, you answer it. Okay. Whoever gets it, gets it. So both of you be prepared. However, the reality is that usually one of them is kind of better at it than the other. They just are more comfortable with it, and the kids tend to ask them more questions. For most kids, that's mom in those early years because they're, I don't know, they're just maybe there more or bath time or I don't know. They're changing the diapers. I don't know. I'm not saying that's the reality now, but and so, but you want to incorporate both of you. So I encourage parents like, Mom, if you answered the question of birth, don't say, well, but Daddy and I both want to talk to you about this, so we're going to wait.
That sounds intense.
It sounds intense. I would say, if you want to do that, that's fine. But I think answering it naturally is important. But then text dad and say, we had the birth story today, so you get the wrap up. And at that night, understand you and mom talked about birth. I was there. I want to talk, I want to talk to you about it also. Like birth is one of the most important days in my life is the day you were born or whatever. But in their minds, you both talk to them, even though one got the initial answer and the other got the wrap up.
That's good.
But I didn't answer your real question was uniquely, I think, relationships with fathers and daughters
Yes.
are so powerful.
Talk about that.
When girls are teenagers or going through an awkward age where they're developing, dads tend to stand off. I don't know how to hug you anymore. You have breasts now. It's just a little side pat. But don't stop the affectionate attention that they need.
That's good.
Because they're looking for affectionate attention from someone. And so maybe it's just that after her track meet, you give her a little shoulder rub. Or maybe you just sit close to her and watch the Final Four.
So keep appropriate affection.
Appropriate.
Especially as they're aging and you start to feel like as a dad potentially, my daughter's becoming a woman. She's not my little girl in the same way. And how do I continue to stay close and affectionate? And it's actually maybe even most important in that season.
And for that, I love Father of the Bride. They played basketball together. So they're high-fiving, they're playing basketball. You know that they're talking about things out there, but they're kidding around. And that's the next step for that father-daughter is just some alone time in an appropriate way, not intense.
Yeah.
And then for the mothers and the sons, boys are so baffled by girls.
That's true.
Don't you think?
Do they ever get over it?
No.
Just kidding.
And so be that resource for your son. Say, I am a girl. I know you don't think I am, but I know how girls think. And as you get older, you're going to wonder, what are they thinking? And I can tell you what they're thinking. They're thinking they would really like for you to smell like soap.
It's good advice.
And they would like for you to pay respectful attention to them, and they would really like to enjoy your company. Talk about movies, talk about books, talk about things that they're interested in. So to get behind your son and be a support for him so that it's not quite so baffling.
Yeah. One of the things I really enjoyed about your talk that you gave this morning is just how candid. This is coming out in our conversation here, just how honest you are. One of the moments you had that was powerful, but you purposely placed it toward the beginning, was you called it, I think, the pornography pause or the porn
pause. For porn.
Pause for porn. And you gave some just really helpful one stats, sobering, I should say. Helpful but sobering on, so a couple things I was surprised about. I want you to talk a little bit about this and even some of the practical, hey, what do I do if my third grader comes across this? One of the things you mentioned is, and we probably could have guessed this, the age of first exposure is going down to where it's like, okay, 8 years old, I think you said. But what the new thing I learned today was the average person watches their first version of pornography for about 20 minutes. And that's because probably they're shocked, but more than that, they don't know how to get out of it.
They don't know how
So talk about that and talk about how parents can respond and prepare their kids for that.
Thank you so much. This is such an important topic, and it's a dark, heavy topic, but we need to bring light to it. Like Satan loves the darkness, and we just need to turn the light on. This is what it is. This is how it's happening, and give parents tools for that. So, and it's the average age is 11, but I said the 8-year-old because that means if the average is 11, then I didn't want you to think the average was 8, but there are much younger kids that are getting exposure. Usually this happens on a tablet, sometimes by accident, sometimes by just cueing in a question that, there was a child who wanted to do something that had a question about chickens, and they put chicks in there, and the pictures of chicks that they got had nothing to do with chickens. Yeah. So they just weren't looking for it, but it came looking for them. So, but when it pops up, if they don't have a plan of what to do for it, you almost need to know at some point it's going to pop up. So as a parent, how do I prepare them for that? And that is starting at a very young age saying you have to be safe. We all have to be safe around screens. There are good pictures. There are bad pictures. There are things that are scary or very inappropriate. And so if that pops up on the screen, what I want you to do is turn the tablet over. And I would demonstrate that for them, and then I would have them show you how do you close this, how do you turn it over? Because if you try to get out of it, I use this example, I get pop-up ads and I try to get out of them.
And they take you to other websites?
They have hidden that X
They have.
somewhere, and you have to look really hard to find it. But if they're watching porn, that's even
They're
more
so shocked
distracting.
by what they're watching,
shocked.
and then they click something, and you were saying it takes them somewhere else.
It takes them somewhere else. And there are a lot of clicks on there. You can't get out of it. You almost can't get out of it. And so that extends the time of their viewing. Because it's not like, you don't want to see this, so here's a great big X up here. No, that doesn't exist. So physically, you just have to turn it over and then go and find your parent or the person in charge.
Yeah.
And also, I didn't say this, but you are not a bad person for seeing a bad picture.
Oh, that's good. You didn't say that today.
I didn't.
That's really good.
And you also will never be in trouble for coming to tell me about it.
I think that's the whole posture of, as much as possible, parents cannot be shocked and surprised.
Right.
Thank
you for coming to tell me. That's important that you did that right. Yes, exactly.
And I'm here to help. And you're not. Yeah, I love that. Another issue that came up that we did talk about a little bit, and obviously this is another, we're getting into, I said this already, but sensitive issues within sensitive issues. How do we think about, you mentioned this briefly, but maybe you have some new things to say or different things. How do we think about LGBTQ? And so a lot of parents are going, okay, I'm trying to, yes, there's pornography, and okay, I got to talk to my kids about sex, and I want to figure out how to do that. And then, but I'm on the baseball team, and Johnny's parents on the baseball team is two dads, and because Dr. Moeller, who we talked about briefly, but he said there's three places of development in a kid's life. There is, I think like my parents. There's other people think differently than my parents, and then there's I think differently than my parents. Those are the three developmental seasons. But early, the age you're dealing with is people start to go, people think differently than my parents. People live differently than my parents. We're confronted with this, whether it's going to be on the swim team, the basketball team, the school system, the neighborhood.
The family.
The family. That's actually, when you were done, I had two different couples come up to me. Oh, the question we didn't get to ask is, my brother is remarried. Anyway, and there's just, whether it was different versions of broken families. Talk to us about how do we talk to young people, young kids, about these sensitive issues.
Ultimately, what we want to be doing is speaking truth to our children and having them see us act in love. We want to speak truth and act in love. And so that's where we're going ultimately. But where do we start with that truth? What's the first truth they're going to hear, and what's the first act of love they're going to see? And so the truth that you're going to tell your 12-year-old is not the same that you're going to tell your kindergartner. So if the kindergartner comes home and says, this is the kind of family, they have two dads, to say, all families are different. Because that is that developmental stage that they're in right now. They're learning that all families are different. And to say, that family has all girls. We have all boys. In our family, our grandmother lives with us, and their grandmother doesn't live with them. Bring about a lot of different – there's not another family like ours.
And maybe you're going to get to this, but one of the things you said is because when you're – make up an age. When you're 7, you can't hold intention sin and grace in the same way you can when you're 25 or 15 even. So talk about that.
Exactly. Young children cannot hold two things at once. They hold things like this is bad, this is wrong, or this isn't the way God intended it to be. And they can't also hold, but we are all sinners and have fallen short, and we all experience the stain of sin, and yet God loves us. That is a complicated thing. I love my friend. His parents are doing something that I believe the Bible says is wrong. That's a lot of complicated steps for a young child. So I wouldn't start there. I wouldn't start with with the ultimate truth of what does God have to say about this. Let's look to God. Let's find out what he has to say about it. And that's more important than what my opinion is of it. So early on, they just need to know that families are different. You're right. Families are different. And then anchor them in God's design. Anchor them. And I love that word because it's like it will hold them in the sways of everything that's going on and that they'll hear and that they'll see and the exposure. What are the anchor pieces? It's really his design of male and female, both in his image and made to be one. And so that is something that, but this family doesn't have male and female. This family has male and male. But God calls a family a male and a female, and the fruit of that family, their children, who are born either male or female. And so focus more on the design.
That's good.
And not the part that's not the design.
You gave the dollar bill illustration.
Yes.
Yes. Here's what a real dollar bill looks like. You'll know when you see a fake one.
Right.
Yeah.
And so if you never talk about the design of families and really be happy about that, the beauty of it, isn't it amazing how God designed all this to be and how we can have families and someday you'll be grown up and you'll get married and you'll have children and we'll have grandchildren and, talk. And this is a silly thing to say, but I think take them to weddings. I love it when brides include
It's great.
children at weddings because they need to see this groom and this bride. When homosexuality or transgender things come into families, we still want to love our family members. That's what they need to see you love them, and that it will have its challenges. I think mutual respect is due to say until our children understand a few things, public displays of affection are challenging for us.
Yes.
There's a lot they don't know. And so if we could all just be friendly while we're together, that would be very helpful for us.
That's
because
such a helpful thing to say. Yes.
We just want to grow up relationally, and that might be kind of surprising for them. And so can we just maybe postpone some of that?
What a kind application. So basically, if I have the relationship with somebody in my family that's living an alternative lifestyle of some sort, to say, hey, listen, I'm trying to be as loving as possible. It's confusing to my kids. Can we refrain from public displays? I think it's so.
And I want them to have a good
Yes.
relationship with them. I want them to grow up, and they would find that confusing right now. We'll get there, but we love you. We want them to love you, but that kind of causes a little bit of hesitation on our part.
Yeah. Okay, I got one last question before we talk a little bit about Birds and Bees ministry and close up. And we're going to zoom out for a second. So I don't know what you'll say about this because this isn't specifically about what you came to talk to about today. But as a pastor of a church with a lot of families in it, why are parents so overwhelmed today? Like I sense an overwhelmness, even though we have more technology and more money and bigger houses and fewer kids. I'm watching people have their first kid or two, and they become like inactive in life. And so I don't know if you have any thoughts on this. You're a mom, you're a grandmother, you go and you speak to young families. Why are young parents so overwhelmed with their lives?
I think you already gave the answer. The first thing you said was we have more technology. And I think that gives us a reason to believe we should be doing everything we're hearing about. We need to be, it's pulling us in a lot of different directions. I'm old enough that I can say we had one television and one phone in the kitchen, and at night we watched the 5 o'clock news with Walter Cronkite, and that was all the information we got in the newspaper.
Yeah.
All the information that we got, and nothing was bombarding us, and we didn't feel like we had to know what was going on everywhere. Of course, I was in El Paso, Texas, so we didn't know what was going on everywhere. But I think they're being bombarded, and then the kids are being very active at a young age. I feel like
This is club sports and all that kind of stuff.
right,
Yes.
and so their weekends are taken up, and parents feel like they're not doing the best for their kids if they don't start them early. Get a trainer, get on this club league. Let's start on the fast track of this sport. When if you talk to real athletes, sometimes they didn't learn that sport until they were in high school and finally got their height, or So I feel like they're pressures that are there, but we're embracing them.
Yeah.
Like we're embracing all of that instead of saying, do we have to? Are we going to do that? And as a believer, I really think, I'm going to be very controversial in saying this, that if it's going to be on Sunday morning, it's not a sport for us.
Yeah.
Because that's really telling our kids something.
Yeah.
If we're skipping one thing to do the other. And I think if we would just stand up, that they would adjust, they'd make adjustments. But they act like that's not a special day.
Well, I on Instagram, which you and I were talking about at the beginning, but there are these reels that I've seen, and I don't know if they must know my age or something. And I saw this reel, and it says, "You woke up at your grandmother's house. It's 1992, and this was all a dream." And it has these images from 1992.
I would love to see that.
And it's like the old grandma couch, and there's one TV there, and no one's got social media, and I have this, like, when I see it, because I'm the last generation. The iPhone came out when I graduated college. So I went through, when I was dating my wife, Margie, we still, I remember I had 7 texts a day I could send. I mean, that was just what it was, because we had 200 texts a month, and I had, does that count? If she texts me, is that one of my texts? And it's just a completely different world now. And I'm the last generation to have grown up without social media and fast speed internet everywhere and mobile phones and all of that. And anyway, it's a different day. So people are listening today. They came to the conference. Maybe they're listening for the first time. They want to hear more about your ministry. So tell us a little bit as we close about Birds and Bees and how they can get more information and any particular resources you'd recommend.
Okay, great. The Birds and Bees, our website is birds-bees.com.
Okay.
We are very active. My business partner, Megan Michelson, great story of how she came to work with me about 10 years ago. It's just the two of us. That's our whole company, just the two of us. And she does our social media and all of our marketing. And she's amazing. And so but our handle, is that what it's called?
Yeah.
Is birds__bees.
Okay.
It's looks cuter than it sounds. But birds__bees. And on our Instagram, you're going to get lots of tips, quick, like just drip, drip, drip conversations about a lot of things. Like this week, they're talking about modesty, how modesty is different from family to family. How do we respect the most modest person in the house? How do you every family does modesty differently.
Oh, yeah.
So that's what she's talking about this week. It's a great, great Instagram. And we're also learning that modesty is different around the world.
It is.
So we have a conversation. But our most comprehensive resource is our course.
Okay, tell us about it.
Okay, and so we will walk you. It's an hour and 15 minutes, broken up into 10 little sessions, and some of them are as long as 3 minutes. Like here's just a quick little reminder, and some are 12 minutes.
Okay.
So it's very, very digestible. Or I would say most people watch the whole hour and 10 minutes.
How
in one
different
setting.
would that course be from what you did with us?
It is exactly.
Okay. So because I had a lady come up to me afterwards, I took 6 pages of notes and I didn't get to write everything down. So if she or anybody wanted to go say, hey, what was that? I need to slow down. I need to pause. And then when you have it, you have access to it 24/7.
You have access to it 24/7 forever. Great. You don't have to subscribe to something. You don't have to resubscribe. Okay. If you buy it, you have it. You download it. It also comes with what I think is my favorite resource. It's the discussion guide. And the discussion guide really helps you think through how you're going to answer these questions. It starts with, how did you hear about sex? How did that impact you? It starts with a conversation between the husband and wife. The parents need to talk about this to each other before they talk to the kids. So I love that guide. You can download that. So everything's digital. The course is digital. The discussion guide is digital. So we're kind of a one-trick pony. That's what you get from the Birds and the Bees. And
so follow that handle. Go to that website for that course. And those are your main resources. Are there any other – all the books that you were talking about, for example, today that you recommended, those are just books you recommend. Those are not part
those are books we recommend. I wrote a book a long time ago called Simple Truths.
Okay.
But what I find is that parents need someone They need to hear someone say it because they were never told.
Oh, that's so good.
If I gave you a book and all the words were in there that I said today,
it would be very different. We need to see your posture, your demeanor, the way you say what you say. You help normalize it today. Here's how you talk about private parts. And first of all, you say, don't call them private parts.
Right.
And you went into it, and it was very helpful.
And I think parents need to hear that conversation and modify it. Modify it to your personality, to your children's personality and their learning styles. There's a lot of modification. You don't have to say exactly what we say, but you heard it said in a way that you thought, I could say that.
Yeah.
And if you read it, that's why we don't have a book, because books are wonderful and they make money if you sell books. But our course is listen to these conversations, go over the discussion guide, get this, be prepared. And we also do, like today, this was a live event. I love live events. But for churches that maybe are remote or small or don't have the capacity to do a large event, we have a large group package.
Got it.
And you show the video.
Show the video. Gather everyone in a room. You could do that with the right-size Sunday school class maybe. Yes.
Anything outside of your home. If you show it in your home, invite your small group. Like, you don't have to just individually watch it. If you can have it in your home, buy the home version. If you want to do it in your church, then it's the large group.
Mary Flo, thank you for your time.
Thank you.
You're about to head and visit one of your daughters as well as grandkids. So thank you for spending a morning with us. Thanks for taking the time to be on this podcast. If you're listening or watching online, I want you to check out Birds and Bees. That's birds, correct me if I'm wrong, birds-bees.com. Or check out the Instagram handle. Mary, thank you. Mary Flo, thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
See you next time on Open Bible, Open Life.